In a small, peaceful town, there lived a young boy named Lucas. He wasn't the tallest, the fastest, or the strongest in his class. He didn't have the flashiest toys or the coolest sneakers. He wasn't even the best at math. But what Lucas did have was something far more special. He had the kindest heart in all of Puddlebrook. And no, that's not the title of some contest like Best Pie Baker or Loudest Burp, though Puddlebrook did host a few odd competitions. Lucas' kindness was something everyone noticed, even if it sometimes got him into the strangest situations. Take, for example, the time Lucas decided to help Mrs. Thompson, the elderly lady who lived in a charming but slightly crumbly house on the corner of Walnut Street. Now, Mrs. Thompson had been a fixture in Puddlebrook for as long as anyone could remember, with roses that bloomed so big they could double as hats. But in recent years, the garden had lost its former glory. The weeds had taken over, and the roses had gone on what seemed to be a permanent. One day, as Lucas was walking to school, he noticed Mrs. Thompson sitting on her porch, looking at her sad, overgrown garden. Now, Lucas could never stand to see anyone sad, especially not Mrs. Thompson. So, without a second thought, Lucas decided he was going to help. He didn't have much of a plan. Lucas wasn't exactly known for thinking things through, but he had heart. After school, while his friends were off playing soccer, Lucas headed straight to the town's tiny gardening shop. He walked up to the counter where Mr. Whiskers was napping behind a pile of fertilizer bags, trying to sound grown up. "Excuse me, Mr. Whiskers," Lucas said, which mostly made him sound like he had a frog in his throat. Mr. Whiskers snorted awake and blinked at Lucas. "What is it, boy?" "Looking for some flower seeds. Got a great deal on sunflower weight." "You're not the kid who ate that whole bag of sunflower seeds last week, are ya?" Lucas shook his head vigorously. That had been Tim. Tim could eat his weight in anything, given the chance. "No, sir," Lucas said. "I'm just looking for something that can grow fast, really fast and pretty." Mr. Whiskers scratched his head. Let's see. You want fast and pretty, eh? How about daisies? They're cheerful, don't need much fuss, and even a squirrel could grow them." "That sounds perfect," Lucas said, and with the few coins he had saved from doing chores, he bought a small packet of daisy seeds. But, of course, nothing ever goes exactly to plan in Puddlebrook. It started well enough. Lucas cleared out the weeds. He dug up the soil, making little holes for the seeds. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. And then came the squirrels. Now, if there was one thing Lucas wasn't prepared for, it was the army of squirrels that called Mrs. Thompson's yard home. It started with just one, a chubby fellow who sat on the fence, watching Lucas with a curious expression. Lucas tried to ignore him. After all, he was there to do a good deed. But then another squirrel showed up, and another. Soon, Lucas was surrounded by at least. "Shoot, go on, shoot!" Lucas waved his hands, trying to scatter the furry creatures. The squirrels, of course, did not shoot. In fact, they seemed to take it as a challenge. One particularly brave squirrel ran up and snatched the seed packet right out of Lucas' hands. "Hey, that's not for you," Lucas yelled, chasing the thief around the yard. But for a kid who wasn't particularly fast, Lucas quickly learned that squirrels were very fast. After a few unsuccessful attempts to catch the furry culprit, Lucas gave up and tried to finish planting what little seeds were left in the packet. By the time he was done, the yard looked chaotic. There were dirt piles everywhere, random holes in the ground, and a suspicious number of squirrel paw prints all over the place. Next day, when he was sitting with his friends, "So, what's up with you?" Tim asked through a mouthful of mashed potatoes. "You weren't at the soccer field yesterday." Lucas leaned back to avoid the potato spray. "I was busy," he said, trying to sound casual. "Busy? Busy doing what? Homework?" "Nah, couldn't be. You're not that kind of kid," Tim teased, shoving a fistful of fries into his mouth. "Emma, who was always the more observant one, narrowed her eyes at Lucas. "You're up to something, aren't you?" Lucas glanced around the cafeteria, making sure Mrs. Thompson wasn't lurking somewhere with her squirrel army. "All right, but you have to promise not to laugh," he said in a low voice. "No promises," Tim said, slurping loudly on his juice box. Lucas rolled his eyes and leaned in closer. "I've been helping Mrs. Thompson with her garden." Emma's eyes lit up. "That's really sweet of you, Lucas." Tim, on the other hand, burst into laughter, nearly choking on his sandwich. "You, gardening? You couldn't grow mold on old bread." Lucas shrugged. "I'm trying." Her garden looked really sad, and I thought it would make her happy if I brought it back to life. Tim stopped laughing long enough to give Lucas a curious look. "Okay, that's actually kind of cool. Weird, but cool. Still, if you're gardening, I give those plants about a week before they either die or take over the world." "Tim," Emma scolded, swatting him with a napkin. Lucas smiled. "It's not easy. The squirrels have been causing all kinds of trouble." Emma asked, raising an eyebrow. "What do squirrels have to do with gardening?" "Everything," Lucas groaned. "They stole half the seeds I planted, and they won't leave the garden alone." Tim wiped his mouth with his sleeve and grinned. "Sounds like you need backup." Lucas blinked. "Backup?" "Yeah, we'll come help." "How hard could it be to outsmart a bunch of squirrels?" Emma sighed. "Tim, this is Lucas' project. I'm sure he..." "No, actually, I could use the help," Lucas admitted, "especially with Tim around to scare the squirrels away with his eating habits." Tim looked pleased with himself, completely missing the insult. "All right, it's settled. After school, we're taking on those squirrels. This is war." Emma face-bombed. "It's not a war, Tim. It's a garden." The daisies had started to sprout, but the squirrels were relentless, digging up the fresh soil and burying their acorns everywhere. Tim, holding a broom like a knight's sword, stood at attention. "All right, squirrels, I'm ready for ya." Emma rolled her eyes. "You're not going to fight the squirrels, Tim." "No, but I'll chase them off. Just call me Squirrel Buster." "Please don't," Emma said. As if on cue, the first squirrel appeared, scurrying across the yard with a cheeky look on its face. Tim swung the broom like a baseball bat, but the squirrel dodged effortlessly, darting up a tree and flicking its tail as if to mock him. "You've met your match," Lucas said, laughing. Tim frowned, undeterred. "Round one goes to the squirrel, but it's not over yet." For the next hour, the three of them worked in the garden, with Tim occasionally leaping up to chase away squirrels, often to no avail. Despite the chaos, they managed to replant some of the stolen seeds, weed the garden, and water the flowers. Emma even managed to shoo away a squirrel by calmly walking up to it and saying, "Excuse me, but this isn't your garden," as if talking to a neighbor borrowing sugar. To everyone's surprise, the squirrel actually left. "How did you do that?" Tim asked, looking bewildered. Emma shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe they just need someone to speak to them politely." "Yeah, sure. That'll work next time," Tim said, rolling his eyes. Despite the squirrels, the garden started to come together. By the time they finished, Lucas felt a little better about things. Mrs. Thompson's yard didn't look like a professional gardener had done it, but it looked cared for. It looked loved. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. "Lucas, dear, this garden looks so lovely. I don't know how it's come back to life, but it means the world to me," Mrs. Thompson said, her eyes twinkling. Lucas blushed. I might have had something to do with it." Mrs. Thompson chuckled softly. "I thought so. You've always had the kindest heart, Lucas." Lucas grinned, but before he could say anything, Mrs. Thompson added, "And I see your friends have been helping too. I found a broom in the garden. I assume that's not for sweeping the flowers." Lucas laughed. "Yeah, that was Tim's idea. He's been helping, in his own way." Later that day, Lucas met up with Tim and Emma at lunch. "So how'd it go with the old lady?" Tim asked, munching on his third sandwich. "She loved it. The garden's really starting to look good," Lucas said proudly. "And she found your broom, by the way," Tim grinned. "See? Squirrel Buster strikes again," Emma groaned. "Please stop calling yourself that." For the next few weeks, Lucas and his friends made it their mission to keep Mrs. Thompson's garden growing strong. They watered the plants, chased off the occasional squirrel, and watched as the daisies bloomed in beautiful, bright colors. Mrs. Thompson would wave to them from her porch, offering cookies and lemon. But it wasn't just Mrs. Thompson who noticed the change in Lucas. His friends began to see how much joy he got from helping others, and it rubbed off on them, too. Tim, despite his goofiness, started to take the gardening seriously. Though he still brought his broom to every squirrel encounter, Emma became the voice of reason, making sure they didn't accidental. And something else changed, too. Lucas found that he didn't just feel good about the garden, he felt good about himself. Mrs. Thompson sat beside him, handing him a glass of lemonade. "You know, Lucas, you've done something truly special here." Lucas shrugged modestly. "It's just a garden." Mrs. Thompson shook her head. "No, it's much more than that. It's kindness. It's friendship. It's learning that when we give a little of ourselves, we get so much more in return." Lucas sipped his lemonade and smiled. "I guess you're right. And it's a pretty nice garden, too," Mrs. Thompson added with a wink. Lucas laughed, feeling a warm glow inside. Sure, the garden wasn't perfect, and the squirrels were still a menace. But something had bloomed in that yard that went beyond flowers. It was the growth of Lucas' kind heart, and that was the best garden of all.
Thanks for joining us on this amazing adventure. We hope you had a blast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Little Listener for more fun stories and surprises. See you next time.